Qurratul Ain, also known as Tahirih, lived a life that is distinguished and courageous. Author and Professor Dr. Bahiyyih Nakhjavani's book, The Woman Who Read Too Much, seeks to bring readers closer to this enigmatic figure in Iranian history. We sat with Dr. Nakhjavani and discussed her book.
This is a book which is a novel. It's a fiction. It's inspired by the life of Tahirih and her times. And so it is about characters who have their historical equivalents, characters who are based on, for example, the mother of the Shah, Mahd Awliya, the sister of the Shah, Izzatul Sultaneh, the wife of the Kalantar of Tehran, in whose house Tahirih was incarcerated for the last 3.5 years of her life under house arrest, and the daughter of Tahirih, Zainab. And these historic figures, as well as the figure of Tahirih Qurratul Ain, of course, herself, inspired me to create characters who, in my story, have no names. And in this story, we explore the life of Tahirih from the time she was captured and brought from the provinces to the time when she was killed. And in the course of that simple 3.5 years, we then go into the past and also go further into the future after her death to try to see her life in the perspective of time and also through these different characters who lived at the same time as her. So we try to circle her, we try to understand who she was through other people and through different perspectives of time. Tahirih was an extraordinary, unusual woman in her age, and still even today. I don't think we will ever get to a point where we will say, oh well, she was an ordinary person, because she had courage, she had intelligence, she had beauty, she had eloquence. She was given, unusually for her time, the education of a boy. So growing up in a very traditional family in Qazvin, where her father and her uncles were all clerics, they were all mullahs, she was given the chance to have the education of a mujtahid and went to Karbala, Najaf, and studied Islamic jurisprudence, became really a scholar of her times. Her age spanned from the first couple of decades of the 19th century through to 1852. She lived for only about 36 years, and she lost everything that women normally value. She lost security, she lost home, she lost husband, children, everything. And she was blamed for having disrupted family, home, marriage, and abandoning her children. So she's a very controversial figure, and right up until quite recently in Iran, I think she was someone whose story was not told and whose story was even suppressed. But I believe now there is a greater interest in her, and there's an element of tragedy in her life because she ended it so soon. But at the same time, there's triumph in her story about a woman who really rose above the element she lived in and did things and went beyond the norms that other women were able to achieve, that even women today still have been able to achieve. So she's an inspiration. I think the issue of women's literacy, which is not just the ability to read and write, but literacy in the sense of command over the knowledge of yourself, which means agency, independence, control over your life, control over decisions. I think this issue of the greater meaning of literacy, access to knowledge, access to power, these are all terribly important in our times. We've seen enough evidence in the last, just very recent years, that the education of girls is something which seems to be a threat to people, but it shouldn't be perceived that way. It's the benefit is going to be reaped by everybody if a woman is educated. The benefits are going to be reaped by her children, by her husband, by her family. It's going to bring bounties beyond belief to generations. So why should we be afraid of it? And Tahirih was someone who symbolized that freedom of thought and belief. And we need to realize that freedom of thought and belief are air for us today. And without it, society suffocates. We need to have that air in order to have creativity, in order to achieve our best for our country, in order to really show the world who we are, and to suppress half the human race on grounds of prejudice, on grounds of fear, on grounds of what we think are traditions that cannot be broken, has been proven time and again in the past not to be effective. So for me, Tahirih was someone who symbolized the need for that change. And I thought it was necessary at this time to write the story because we're in a world which is changing, whether we know it or not. So she was like someone who had the banner already in her hand and was riding way ahead of all of us. And so for me, she's a heroine. For me, she wasn't a perfect human being. She had her flaws, but at the same time, she had a courage that I would like our daughters to inherit for the benefit of humankind, for the benefit of their brothers, their husbands, their fathers and their sons. And so I really wanted that story to be told for the sake of all of us. Well, you know, I'm a Shakespearean scholar, and there is a line in Macbeth, one of the lords remembering what has happened to certain people in the kingdom who were friendly with Macbeth at one point and who ended up in trouble. He says about one of Macbeth's close associates, Banquo, he says, "He walked too late. Men must not walk too late." And I've always been struck by that. In a time of tyranny, in a time of suppression, because Macbeth was a tyrant, men could not walk too late. That meant they could not go out in the evening. They'd end up being murdered. And I thought, well, if that's the problem for men, imagine the difficulties faced by women. And then I thought, it's not just walking too late, it's reading too much. And as soon as you say to something, it's too much, to this, to that, you are indicating there's something dangerous going on. Now, we live in a time, unfortunately, where people read less and less. To read too much is just as dangerous for societies in the West as it is for societies anywhere in the East where maybe women are less literate, or I was thinking of Africa and these poor girls in Boko Haram. There are many places in the world where women are deprived of education. Even in places where they are given education, there are other elements that stop them reading deeply. And I wanted to indicate it's that deep reading that is dangerous to any form of tyranny. As soon as you start thinking deeply, reading deeply, looking underneath the superficial aspects of society, then you begin to think for yourself. Then you're apparently seen as a threat instead of seen as a benefit to society because you've got a mind of your own, because you're able to contribute independently. I wanted to play with the idea of reading as a metaphor in this book, because it is a fiction, as I said. In this book, there is no historical analysis of actually the figure of Tahrir Qurratul Ain. And so I used a character who was teaching women how to read. In fact, she teaches even the soldiers how to read. And the act of reading becomes a metaphor for understanding, for thinking for yourself, for seeing beyond the surface of things. And that's what's dangerous about what my character in the book is doing. She's teaching people to think. And that's part of the reason why I wanted that title.